Ah Lang and I had always loved the outdoors. The wilderness felt like a hidden world, far removed from the concrete entrapment of Hong Kong. There was something magical in the silence of nature, a quiet that held secrets. This weekend, we'd decided to escape to one of the smaller islands near Lama. It was perfect, just the two of us, away from the endless hum of the city. Alone, at last. Our friends were supposed to join us later, but we opted for the earlier boat. A head start, we told ourselves. A bit of calm before the inevitable chaos of company. But as we stepped off the boat onto the island's rocky shore, something shifted. The boatman was older than I had first realized. His skin was weathered, creased by countless sunrises, his eyes dark as if they'd seen too many things best left unspoken. He lingered as we gathered our gear, his gaze heavy, as though weighing something invisible. Ah Lang, usually so confident, shifted beside me, his unease palpable. The boatman cleared his throat, the sound like sandpaper scraping against stone. "You boys sure you want to camp here tonight?" I forced a smile, perhaps a little too quickly. "Yeah, we've got it all planned out." The old man said nothing, but his eyes flicked upwards, scanning the dimming sky with the practiced gaze of someone who knows more than they ever let on. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, almost to himself. "You know what day it is on the lunar calendar?" Ah Lang shrugged, trying for casual. "We don't really follow the lunar calendar, uncle." "Is there something special about today?" A sigh escaped the old man's lips, the kind of sigh that carried years of forgotten stories, stories that lingered just out of reach. He looked at us again, more tired than before. "If you need me," he muttered, "just radio. I'll come." And with that, he turned, his boat slipping away into the gray horizon, leaving behind a silence that felt too still, too deliberate. The air, once lively with the whispers of the sea breeze, grew thick. The usual sounds of nature, birds, crickets, anything, were conspicuously absent. I could feel something watching, but from where, or what, I couldn't say. But we laughed it off. We had to. The quiet was unnerving, but it wasn't enough to shake us yet. We hiked inland, trading half-hearted jokes, hoping they'd dispel the strange weight that had settled over us. "You know," Ah Lang said with a sly grin, nudging me, "once we set up the tent, we could reenact that one scene from Brokeback Mountain." I rolled my eyes, trying to match his ease. "You're always thinking about that, aren't you?" "Can you blame me?" he laughed, the sound a little too loud in the empty space. "You make it hard to focus on anything else." We found a clearing by a stream, the kind of place that should have felt perfect, if not for the feeling. A low, nagging hum in the back of my mind, as though the trees themselves were watching, waiting for something to happen. But we ignored it. We had to. The tent was up just as the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a sky streaked with hues of burnt orange and purple. I checked my phone. The signal was weak, but enough for a message from May. "Sorry. Missed the last boat. We won't make it tonight. We'll catch the first boat in the morning." Ah Lang groaned theatrically, flopping onto the ground. "Great. I was really looking forward to a hot meal with everyone." I chuckled. "We've still got plenty of sausage right here." He shot me a playful grin. "Maybe later, we'll get to that." But later never came as we planned. The sun had slipped away completely, and the air grew cold, colder than it should have for this time of year. We fumbled through our supplies, preparing for dinner, only to realize the most essential thing was missing: matches. "Looks like we'll have to wait until morning for a fire," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But the cold had already started to sink deeper into my bones. And that's when Ah Lang noticed it. "Do you see that?" he asked, his voice hushed, pointing down the hill. A faint light flickered in the distance, soft and warm, like lanterns swaying gently in the breeze. "I thought this island was supposed to be uninhabited," I murmured, narrowing my eyes. Maybe there's a village we didn't know about, Alang suggested. Where there's a village, there's food. We grabbed our flashlights, and I felt a pull, an inexplicable tug toward the lights. We descended into the darkness, the forest closing in around us, the soft crunch of leaves underfoot the only sound in a world that had gone eerily quiet. At the bottom, we stumbled upon it, a roadside stall, dimly lit by lanterns that swayed like forgotten dreams. An old man stood behind a boiling pot, his face lined with age, his eyes sharp, too sharp. "You boys just arrived?" he asked, his voice low, raspy, almost amused. "Yeah," I replied, feeling a cold knot twist in my gut. "Just tonight." His eyes flicked over us, then softened, a shadow of something, pity, perhaps? "So young," he muttered, almost to himself. He gestured for us to sit, and soon, the rich aroma of wonton noodles filled the air, warm and savory. My stomach growled, and despite the unease gnawing at me, I ate. The broth was warm, the noodles perfect. But with each bite, the feeling grew heavier, pressing down like the weight of something long forgotten. When Alang offered him money, $100 note, the old man's eyes widened. His hands trembled as he pushed the bill back. "No. No need," he said, his voice quivering. "Just leave. You shouldn't be here." My stomach twisted, the unease now blooming into full dread. "What do you mean?" I asked. He glanced around, eyes flicking into the shadows as if something was waiting just beyond the light. "Don't ask questions. Just go." We left. We had no choice. As we walked, the village, if you could call it that, fell silent. The lanterns flickered, and I felt the weight of too many eyes on us. I whispered to Alang, maybe it's some kind of retirement village for rich folks. But as soon as I spoke, everything stopped. The villagers, once slow-moving and frail, turned. Their eyes gleamed in the lantern light, sharp and unnatural. One old woman, her face a mask of decay and hunger, approached, sniffing the air like a wolf scenting prey. "Fresh humans," she whispered, her voice rasping like dry leaves. My heart stopped. Alang took a step back, pale. "What the hell?" The woman grinned, revealing sharp, yellowed teeth. "So much fresh chi." The villagers moved then, their limbs jerking, twisting into shapes that no human should take. They surged toward us, their hunger palpable, their silence terrifying. "Run!" Alang shouted, and we bolted, the world a blur of shadows and flickering lights as we sprinted back toward the trees. They were fast, impossibly fast. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I didn't dare slow down. "There!" I gasped, pointing to a rundown cabin hidden among the trees. "Hide inside." We threw ourselves into the cabin, slamming the door shut. The air inside was thick with rot, but we bolted the door and backed away, our hearts pounding in the oppressive silence. Outside, we could hear them, whispering, scratching, their voices like the wind through dead branches. "I can smell their yang qi," one hissed. I clamped my hand over Alang's mouth. We waited. The night stretched on, an eternity of whispers and scratches, until, slowly, the voices faded, leaving behind only silence. When I woke, the cabin was gone. We lay on the cold ground, dirt and leaves scattered around us. Alang sat up, confused. "What the hell? I swear we were in a cabin last night." I nodded, too stunned to speak. Then I saw it. A small, weathered shrine stood nearby, its roof covered in moss and vines. "Wait," I whispered. "This is a shrine to 2D Gong." Lang looked at me, wide-eyed. "The Earth God? You think he protected us?" "He must have," I murmured. The realization sent a chill through me. We packed up in silence, and as we made our way back, I glanced down the hill. What had been a village was now a sprawling cemetery, tombstones standing like silent witnesses in the morning light. "It's not a village," I whispered. "It's a cemetery." We rushed to the dock, where our friends were waiting. May smiled apologetically. "Sorry again. None of the boatmen would take us here last night. They said it was the 14th day of the 7th lunar month." My heart sank. "The ghost festival?" She nodded. "Yeah. They said the spirits were out, bad luck to be on the water at night." And that's when it hit. The memory of the wonton noodles, the weight of the night, the gnawing dread that hadn't left since we ate. My stomach twisted, and I doubled over. Ah Lang, beside me, did the same. We coughed and retched, something thick and grainy forcing its way out. It wasn't food. It was dirt. Wet, foul-smelling, clumpy mud. It was supposed to be a weekend escape, just a group of friends disconnecting from the noise of everyday life. It had been months since we'd all been together, and the idea of spending a few nights deep in the wilderness sounded perfect. No phones, no work, just nature and a campfire. I was excited, especially since it was my idea to go camping in the first place. I'd found a remote spot, far from the well-trodden trails, a place we'd have all to ourselves. Or so I thought. There were 5 of us, me, Ben, Sarah, Mike, and Emily. We had known each other since college and had done countless trips together, though none as isolated as this. The drive out was uneventful, laughs, music, snacks. By the time we reached the dirt road that led into the forest, the sun was already low on the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows through the trees. "Man, this place is really out there, huh?" Ben said, leaning forward in the passenger seat, squinting out into the growing dusk. "That's the point," I replied with a grin, but something about his tone made me uneasy for the first time. The forest was denser than I remembered from my research, and the towering trees seemed to close in the farther we drove. We parked the car at the edge of a rough trail that led deeper into the woods. After grabbing our backpacks and supplies, we began the hike to our campsite. It was a bit of a trek, maybe a mile or 2, but the air was crisp, and we joked to keep the mood light. Emily kept pointing out constellations as the last traces of sunlight vanished, and Sarah snapped pictures of the twisted trees and moss-covered rocks. Everything felt right. By the time we reached the clearing, night had fully descended. The moon was barely visible through the thick canopy overhead, but we had enough flashlights to set up the tents. We worked quickly, and within an hour, we had a fire going and were sitting around it, passing beers and sharing stories. For a while, everything was perfect. Then the sound started. At first, it was subtle. A rustling in the trees just beyond the firelight. I noticed it before anyone else, but I didn't say anything. Probably just an animal, I thought. Maybe a raccoon or a deer. But then it happened again, and again. Each time, the noise seemed closer. "Did you guys hear that?" Mike asked, turning his head toward the trees. "Yeah, what is that?" Sarah added, her voice a little shaky. I tried to stay calm, not wanting to ruin the night with paranoia. "It's probably just some wildlife. We're in the middle of the woods, after all. Nothing to worry about." But it was hard to ignore the feeling that something wasn't right. The noises didn't sound like animals moving through the brush, they were too deliberate, like footsteps trying to remain quiet. The fire cast long shadows, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder more often than I wanted to admit. Then, just as Ben was about to crack a joke, we all heard it, an unmistakable, low whisper. It came from the darkness beyond the fire, too faint to make out the words, but clear enough that we all froze. Did someone just say something?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No one's out here but us," I replied, but even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure I believed them. "Maybe we should check it out?" Ben suggested, but no one moved. The idea of stepping beyond the safety of the firelight seemed insane. Instead, we stayed close to the flames, our laughter and conversation now replaced by tense silence. The forest around us was unnaturally still, save for the occasional snap of a twig or the flutter of leaves. Every now and then, I caught a glimpse of something moving between the trees, but every time I shone my flashlight in that direction, there was nothing there. "Okay, this is starting to creep me out," Sarah finally admitted, pulling her knees to her chest. "It feels like we're being watched." I wanted to tell her she was just being paranoid, that it was all in her head, but I couldn't shake the feeling either. The forest, which had felt so peaceful just hours ago, now felt oppressive. The trees loomed over us, their branches twisting like skeletal arms, and the darkness seemed to press in closer with every passing minute. Then, without warning, the fire went out. It didn't flicker or die down gradually. One moment it was burning bright, and the next it was gone, plunging us into total darkness. Panic set in instantly. Emily screamed, and Mike fumbled with his flashlight, dropping it in the dirt. I scrambled to turn mine on, my hands shaking, and when the beam finally cut through the darkness, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Standing at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of my flashlight, was a figure. Tall and motionless, it was impossible to make out any details in the darkness, but I could see its shape, the faint outline of a human form, watching us. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. The figure didn't move. Ben grabbed his flashlight, aiming it in the same direction, but the figure was gone. Just like that, vanished into the trees. "Did you see that?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "I saw it," Mike whispered, his face pale. "There was someone standing right there." "We need to get out of here," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Now." For a moment, we all just stood there, unsure of what to do. The darkness felt alive, like it was closing in on us, suffocating us. Every instinct screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. We were miles from the car, deep in the forest with no signal, and the path back was shrouded in pitch black. "I'm not staying here," Emily said, grabbing her backpack. "I don't care if I have to walk in the dark, I'm not staying." We quickly packed up what we could, adrenaline fueling our movements. The air was thick with tension, and the rustling in the trees had grown louder, more deliberate. As we started down the path, flashlights shaking in our hands, the feeling of being watched grew unbearable. Then, just as we rounded a bend in the trail, I heard it again, the whisper. But this time, it was right behind me. "Go," I whispered to the others, pushing them forward. "Go faster." No one argued. We practically sprinted down the trail, stumbling over roots and rocks in our panic. My breath came in ragged gasps, and every step felt like it brought us closer to whatever was following us. The whispering grew louder, closer, until it felt like it was right next to my ear, though no one was there. Then, up ahead, we saw it. The car. Relief washed over me like a wave, but it was short-lived. Standing beside the car, illuminated by the glow of our flashlights, was the figure. Tall, thin, and featureless in the dark, it stood there, unmoving, as if it had been waiting for us all along. "What the hell is that?" Ben gasped, coming to a halt. "We have to get in the car," I shouted, my voice rising in desperation. But none of us moved. We were paralyzed by fear, staring at the figure in disbelief. Then, slowly, it began to move. Not toward us, but around the car, circling it with deliberate, measured steps. It was like it was toying with us, waiting for us to make a move. "We're not alone out here," Mike whispered, his voice shaking. That was all it took to break the spell. We bolted for the car, throwing open the doors and piling in. I fumbled with the keys, my hands trembling as I tried to start the engine. For a terrifying moment, it wouldn't turn over, and I could feel the figure getting closer, its presence pressing in on us. Finally, the engine roared to life, and I floored the gas pedal, the tires kicking up dirt as we sped down the narrow path, away from the campsite, away from the figure, away from whatever had been watching us in the woods. None of us spoke on the drive back. The only sound was the hum of the engine and our ragged breathing. When we finally reached the main road, I pulled over, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. "What the hell just happened?" Sarah whispered, breaking the silence. "I don't know," I admitted, staring out into the night. "But I don't think we were supposed to be there." No one argued. We didn't need to. We all knew, deep down, that something had followed us out of those woods. Something that wasn't human. And as we drove away, leaving the forest behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that whatever had watched us out there was still watching. Still waiting.